The kettle whistled at precisely 6:42 a.m. Every morning, it did the same. Elijah Reynolds would sit at his small kitchen table, hands folded, back straight, and wait until the pitch was just high enough to wake the memory of silence that filled his house. He didn't drink the tea right away. He poured it into a faded ceramic mug, the one with a chip on the rim, and let it cool as he stared out the window. The view never changed. A bird bath that hadn't seen water or birds in years. Not by choice, but by gravity. His wife, Margaret, had died 7 winters ago. She was the last person who had looked at him like he was here. After her, the silence came fast, like floodwater. Family sent Christmas cards with printed names, but no handwriting. He didn't blame them. People his age were like sidewalk cracks. You only noticed them when you tripped. At 9 a.m., he left the house. A slow walk to the park 3 blocks down. A small thermos of now lukewarm tea. Not the people. He'd long stopped pretending they noticed him. But the sky. He liked clouds. They reminded him of Margaret's voice, always shifting, always there, even when you couldn't describe them. He'd sit for an hour, sometimes 2. He knew when to leave by the way the air changed, the way the kids started appearing after school, loud and full of color. That's when he'd go home. The kind of quiet that wasn't restful but heavy, not because he disliked them, he didn't know them. Occasionally, someone would wave, he would nod. His groceries were delivered, his days were stitched together by nothing more than repetition. Sometimes at night he talked to Margaret. He'd sit in the chair she used to love, beside the cold fireplace, and think her voice into the room. You wouldn't believe how quiet it's gotten, he'd think. The birds stopped coming. Even the squirrels don't visit the porch anymore. He imagined her reply. Maybe they're tired of waiting for someone to talk to. He'd smile, a real one. He was sitting in the living room, listening to the old grandfather clock tick its way toward another sleepless night, when he heard a noise outside, a rustle. He walked to the front window, pushed the curtain aside. Nothing. Still nothing. Lower this time. He stepped out onto the porch, wrapping his cardigan tighter against the cold. The night was crisp, and then he saw it. Across the street near the base of a tree. Something low, small, or maybe a bundled-up coat someone had dropped. But then it shifted. Not much, just enough to prove it was alive. Elijah hesitated. Every instinct told him to go back inside. He was too old to go wandering, too fragile. But something pulled at him, something in the stillness, something in that barely there motion. He crossed the street slowly, 1 foot at a time, heart beating in his ears. As he got closer, the shape came into focus. A dog, medium-sized, thin, coat dirty and matted. One paw twisted beneath it, dark with what looked like dried blood. Its eyes opened as Elijah approached, wide, dull, and full of something that stopped him cold. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pain, it was surrender. That dog had stopped expecting help a long time ago. Elijah stared, so did the dog. Neither moved. Then slowly, as if compelled by something older than logic, Elijah knelt. His knees popped, and the cold bit into his bones, but he didn't flinch. The dog didn't growl, didn't whimper, just watched him with eyes that had seen too much. Elijah reached out a trembling hand. The dog didn't move. Their fingers met, skin to fur, and in that instant something shifted. The silence broke, not with sound, but with presence. He didn't know what to do, didn't know if he could lift the animal or what kind of injury it had, but he knew one thing: he couldn't leave it, not tonight, not again. That's how it began, with an old man in a cardigan on his knees beside a broken animal under a tree. No one saw them, no one noticed, but for the first time in a long, long while, Elijah felt seen. The park bench hadn't changed in years. Same faded initials carved into the backrest. L+M 1982, likely long forgotten by whoever once etched them there. It was positioned near the edge of the walking trail, just far enough from the fountain to avoid the splash, but close enough to hear the water when the wind shifted. That was where Elijah sat most mornings. He didn't check his phone because he didn't have one. The kind that doesn't come from lack of sound, but from the world simply no longer asking anything of you. Some days, children played nearby. Their laughter rang out like bells across the park, but never quite reached Elijah's bench. Other times, joggers passed, eyes forward, faces locked in sweat and determination, never seeing him. Dog walkers sometimes glanced his way, perhaps noticing the stillness, but always kept moving. He wasn't bitter. He understood his role. The elderly man on the bench. That morning, frost clung to the grass, like a memory refusing to let go. Elijah's thermos steamed in the cold. He poured half a cup, letting the heat sting his fingers before sipping. The bitterness was familiar. Too much time on the burner, not enough honey. But he drank it anyway. Routine. Not for the news. He didn't trust it anymore, but for the crossword. Margaret used to do them in ink. He used a dull pencil. Not because it was hard. A pigeon strutted past, head bobbing. A young man argued loudly on his phone near the entrance to the park. The world moved. A tension in the air, the kind he couldn't name, but had learned to feel. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. He couldn't explain it, but his gut tightened. Like the pause before a note breaks in music. Just the ordinary world unaware of him. Too much time alone. He looked back down at the crossword, and that's when he heard it. A sound, soft, broken, not a bark. A whimper, faint, like the end of a cry that had gone unanswered for too long. Elijah looked up. The sound came again, just once, from somewhere behind the trees near the edge of the park. He stood slowly, bones resisting. Left his thermos on the bench, didn't think to bring the paper. The trees were thin this time of year, stripped of their leaves. The path beneath them was muddy in places, crusted in others. Elijah followed the sound like a thread, pulled by something deeper than curiosity. Another whimper, clearer now, closer. He stepped through a gap in the undergrowth and saw it, a small form curled beneath a pine, partially hidden by low branches. A dog. It wasn't moving, not fully. Its chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. One paw stuck out at an unnatural angle, matted with dirt and blood. Its fur, once white or light brown, was grey with grime. Elijah froze. He didn't know much about animals. Margaret had always wanted a dog, but their building had rules. By the time they had a house, she was too sick. Still, he'd seen enough stray pain in his life to recognize what this was. Abandonment. Survival. Barely. He crouched slowly, the ground damp beneath him. "Hey, boy," he said gently, unsure why he whispered. "Or girl. Doesn't matter, it's all right." The dog didn't move, but its eyes opened, one of them swollen, the other dull. They locked eyes. There was no tail wag, no trust, just exhaustion. And yet, something passed between them. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a half-eaten granola bar from breakfast. He peeled the wrapper and placed it a foot away from the dog. "Here," he said softly. "Try it." The dog didn't move. Elijah waited. A full minute. Then finally the dog shifted. Not much, just enough to stretch its neck and sniff. Its tongue flicked out. A bite. Then another. Then it stopped, resting again, eyes fluttering closed. Elijah exhaled slowly. That was enough. Enough to know he couldn't walk away. He returned to the bench for his coat, wrapped it carefully around the dog, trying not to jostle the injured leg. It didn't resist, didn't whimper, just breathed. He lifted it slowly, painfully, a tudum, and held it close. It was heavier than it looked, but not as heavy as being alone. As he walked through the park, people looked at him for the first time in years, not out of recognition, out of curiosity. An old man with a filthy, bleeding dog wrapped in a coat was hard to ignore, but Elijah didn't look back. He held the weight against his chest and kept walking. For the first time in a very long time, he had somewhere to be. The snow had started to fall by the time Elijah reached his front steps. It was the dry kind, the kind that danced instead of landing, glinting in the porch light like tiny pieces of ash. The dog didn't move much in his arms. Its weight felt heavier with every step, not just because of the strain on Elijah's back, but because of what it represented. Responsibility. Vulnerability. A choice that couldn't be undone. He hadn't carried anything this fragile in years, not since Margaret. He pushed the door open with his foot and stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit him like a wall, but it didn't bring comfort. Not yet. He looked down at the bundle in his arms. The dog's breathing was shallow. Its fur was cold, even through the coat. "Let's get you sorted," he muttered, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, the dog or himself. The living room was dim, lit only by the orange glow of a lamp in the corner. Dust clung to the edges of the furniture like cobwebs. He hadn't hosted anyone in years, hadn't needed to. He cleared a space on the rug near the heater, laid the dog down gently. It whimpered, the first real sound it had made since the park. Elijah knelt beside it, heart pounding. The left front leg was the worst, swollen red, matted with dried blood and crusted snow. He had no training, no first aid kit, no clue what to do. But he couldn't just sit there, so he did what came to him. He spoke. "It's all right, boy, you made it. You're inside now." The dog's eyes opened, barely, and fixed on him again. No fear, just fatigue. He shuffled to the kitchen, opening drawers he hadn't touched in months. Found an old towel, a bottle of hydrogen peroxide, a half-used roll of gauze from some long-forgotten injury. He filled a bowl with warm water, grabbed a sponge. As he returned, the dog tried to lift its head, a weak gesture of defense, but Elijah held out a hand. "No, stay down. I won't hurt you." He knelt again, soaked the towel and began to clean the wound. The dog whimpered but didn't pull away. The peroxide fizzed, and Elijah winced at the sound, not from disgust, but from empathy. The dog's body trembled once, then settled. "Good boy," Elijah whispered. "You're tougher than you look." He wrapped the leg in gauze with shaky fingers. Not perfect, not professional, but enough. When it was done, he sat back on his heels and exhaled. His joints ached. His hands smelled of blood and antiseptic, but something in him felt lighter. He brought over a bowl of water. The dog sniffed at it but didn't drink. Too tired. Elijah grabbed a blanket from the couch, the one Margaret used to use, and draped it over the animal. "You rest. I'll stay close." He didn't turn on the TV, didn't go to bed. He pulled the armchair close and sat, watching the rise and fall of the dog's chest, as if keeping vigil over a flickering flame. He didn't know how long he stayed there. Hours, maybe. At some point, the snow thickened outside, clinging to the windows like frostbitten hands. But inside, something else had settled. A presence. Around 3 a.m., the dog stirred. Elijah opened his eyes. He hadn't meant to sleep, but his body had betrayed him. The dog tried to stand, failed. Elijah reached forward. "Easy. Don't rush it." The dog looked at him. Really looked. Eyes wide, unsure. Then slowly, carefully, it crawled forward. Not far, just enough to press its body gently against Elijah's foot. Elijah froze. Then his breath caught in his throat. That simple touch, weightless, instinctive, felt like a language older than words. "I'm here," it said. And for the first time in 7 winters, Elijah believed it. The sun was barely rising when Elijah stood, stretched his back and shuffled into the kitchen. He opened a cabinet, stared at the cans of soup, then, on a whim, opened the fridge. There wasn't much, but there was a pack of turkey slices. He peeled a few off, placed them in a dish and warmed them slightly. "Breakfast," he announced as he returned. The dog sniffed, then slowly with shaky limbs, stood and began to eat. Not much, but enough. Elijah sat beside him, still in his robe, and watched. "You and me," he said softly. "Maybe we're not done yet." The dog looked up, tail giving a faint, almost invisible wag. That was the moment, not a miracle, but a beginning. But the first morning with the dog in the house felt like waking up in someone else's life. Elijah opened his eyes before the sun rose. It wasn't the creak of the floorboards or the groan of the radiator that woke him. It was awareness. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone in the house, and that changed everything. The dog, still unnamed, lay curled near the heater where Elijah had placed a folded blanket over a towel. He hadn't moved much during the night, except to press himself closer to the warmth. The leg was still bandaged, though the blood had stopped. Elijah sat in his armchair and simply watched. He didn't know what to do with his hands or his thoughts. There was something strangely loud about the dog's breathing. Not noisy, but present, like a ticking clock in a silent room. He sipped his tea and realized it was cold. For the first time in years, he'd forgotten to boil water. The morning passed slowly. Elijah fed the dog more turkey slices and a bit of wet bread soaked in warm broth. The dog sniffed suspiciously, then ate. Slowly, gratefully. It didn't wag its tail, didn't bark, but it didn't flinch when Elijah touched it either. That was something. He opened a window to let in fresh air, then closed it 5 minutes later when the cold bit too sharply. He rearranged the blankets on the couch, not because they needed fixing, but because everything felt like it was changing. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a place holding its breath. By midday, Elijah was pacing. He hadn't left the house since the night before. Normally he would have taken a walk to the park, sat on his bench, but not now. He couldn't leave the dog. He stared out the window, watched people pass. One neighbor walked a golden retriever across the street, leash taut, tail wagging. Elijah's eyes followed them longer than he meant to. Inside, his own dog, he wasn't too sure he could call it that yet, lifted its head. Their eyes met. "You're not ready for leashes," Elijah said, "and I'm not ready for introductions." He went to the bookshelf, brushed the dust from the lower shelves, found an old first aid guide he didn't remember owning. Nothing about animals, but it felt like a start. That night, Elijah heated a can of soup for himself and laid out a soft-boiled egg and more turkey for the dog. They ate in silence, side by side, but not quite together. Later, he sat near the fire. He'd lit it for the first time in a year, and the dog lay curled nearby, not touching him, not distant, just there. He found himself humming, a melody he didn't recognize. Or maybe it was Margaret's. Either way, it filled the room like warmth. On the second day, the dog stood, just for a moment, but it stood. Elijah clapped his hands once, startled by his own reaction. The dog tilted its head, confused. "That's progress," he said. "Don't rush it." He realized he was talking more than usual, out loud, to someone, something, and it didn't feel crazy. He found an old towel and set it near the back door. "Bathroom's outside," he said. "We'll have to figure that out together." The dog didn't move. Still, it was listening. That much he knew. On the third night, Elijah opened a drawer in the hallway, one he hadn't touched in 7 years. Inside were Margaret's scarves, her gloves, a collar they had bought long ago on sale, just in case they ever got a dog. He pulled it out, ran his fingers over the cracked leather. It still had the tag attached, no name. He brought it to the dog, sat cross-legged beside it and held it out. "You've earned this, I think." He didn't buckle it, just placed it gently near the dog's front paws. The dog sniffed it, then looked up. Elijah smiled. "We'll get to names soon." That night, Elijah couldn't sleep, not from worry, from motion. His mind was moving, ideas, lists. Could he take the dog to the vet? Did he still have that old cart in the garage to transport it? What about shots? licenses, food. Responsibility crept in like vines around the quiet he had built, but instead of fear, he felt awake, alive. He stared at the ceiling and whispered, "You're not the only stranger here, boy." It started with a twitch, just a flick of the ear, barely noticeable, as Elijah shuffled past the dog on his way to the kitchen. He caught it in the corner of his eye and paused. The dog's head was up, ears slightly perked, eyes alert. "Something catch your attention?" Elijah asked softly, pouring water into the kettle. The dog didn't move, but didn't look away either. Elijah smiled. "Didn't think so." He returned to the chair, settled with his mug, and unfolded the crossword again. He still couldn't bring himself to finish one, but today the silence was different. Not heavy, tense, expectant, like the house was holding its breath. It happened that afternoon. The dog had begun walking, slowly, carefully, from room to room, dragging the bad leg slightly but with growing strength. Elijah had taken to following behind, like a butler. "You need help with stairs, you let me know." The dog gave him a look, half skeptical, half tolerant. In the hallway, it stopped near a door Elijah hadn't opened in years, Margaret's sewing room. The door was closed, but the dog sniffed under it, then sat down in front of it with a quiet huff. "You don't want to go in there," Elijah said, voice thin. "There's nothing for you in that one." But the dog didn't move, didn't look back. It just waited. Elijah stood frozen in the hall, heart thudding louder than it had in months. He hadn't touched that room since the funeral. The door remained closed like a line he couldn't cross, until now, with a breath that felt like the start of something, or the end, he reached out and turned the knob. The room smelled like time, dust, old fabric, varnish. Everything was where she had left it. The spools of thread, the dressmaker's mannequin, the teacup with a broken handle by the windowsill. The dog stepped inside first. No hesitation, no reverence, just curiosity. Elijah followed, slower, every object a memory wrapped in cotton. The dog sniffed around, tail finally giving a hesitant wag. And then, without warning, it turned toward the window and let out a sound. A sharp, sudden bark. Not loud, not aggressive, just a voice. Elijah stumbled back a step, startled. It had been so long since he'd heard a bark in this house, maybe ever. The sound echoed off the walls, bounced into the corners, and brought something with it. Something Elijah hadn't felt in years. Life. The dog barked again. This time, a little louder. Its ears perked fully now, eyes bright. Elijah felt his throat tighten. He laughed, short and stunned. "Well, look at you." The dog trotted over, tail swishing like a flag, barked once more, a statement. "I hear you," Elijah whispered. "I really do." He knelt, despite the ache in his knees, and wrapped his arms around the dog. The animal stiffened for a moment, then leaned in. They stayed like that for a long time, no one watching, no audience. Just a man who hadn't been touched in 7 years, and a dog who had forgotten it was allowed to speak. Later, as they sat in the living room, Elijah stared into the fireplace and said, "You've got a voice. Guess I do too." He reached for the crossword again. Filled in 6 answers this time. That night, just before bed, the dog barked once more, this time at a shadow moving outside the window. Elijah went to check. It was just a tree branch. But the sound had woken him differently than before. It hadn't startled him. It had anchored him. He was no longer living alone. He was living with. And that changed everything. The sewing room door remained open after that day. Elijah didn't close it again. He couldn't, not after the dog had barked for the first time there, not after something inside him had shifted, cracked, gently, like old glass finally letting in light. He started leaving the door open, not just as a symbol, but as an invitation. And the dog, who still had no name, returned to it often, not always to explore, sometimes just to lie in the threshold as if guarding it, or waiting. Elijah never told him to move. He understood that kind of watchfulness. In the mornings, Elijah made 2 cups of tea instead of one for himself. One he left cooling on the table, like he used to in the early days after Margaret's death. Back then, the second cup had been more of a habit. Now it was a kind of ritual, not for her, for him. He needed to remember what it felt like to consider someone else first, even if that someone no longer sat across from him. And in a strange way, the dog lying on the rug near his feet was enough to make the silence less cruel. It started with scent. Elijah was cleaning a corner of the room he hadn't touched in years, dusting mostly, moving old sewing baskets and a yellowing stack of handwritten patterns, and then it hit him. Lavender, not strong, just a hint, like something woven into the wood itself. Margaret's perfume. He froze. The memory didn't come as a flashback. It came as a sensation. He was suddenly 42 again. Margaret was sitting at the desk, her hair pinned up, laughing at a crooked hemline. "You cut it too short again," she teased. He had forgotten that sound, but now it rang clear, and it cracked something open in him. He sat on the edge of the bed and wept into his hands, not out of grief, but out of return. The dog padded into the room, head low, and placed its chin on Elijah's knee. No bark, no gesture, just presence. And that was everything. Later that evening, Elijah opened a small chest he hadn't dared touch. Inside were Margaret's journals, a stack of postcards, a sealed envelope with his name on it. He didn't open it. Not yet. He ran his fingers over the handwriting. "I used to know this woman," he whispered to the dog. "Every curve of every letter." He showed the postcard to the dog. "Paris, we never made it there. Always said we would, though. Kept the dream alive through catalogs and coffee." The dog looked up at him, eyes patient. "Now look at me," Elijah said, "feeding you canned turkey like it's gourmet." The dog sneezed. Elijah laughed. "I'll take that as commentary." That night, Elijah placed a pillow beside the hearth, where the dog liked to sleep. "I had a dog once," he said aloud, surprising even himself. He sat down slowly. "Just for a week. I was 7. My dad brought it home, stray from the dockyard. Named him Sailor. He bit the mailman. That was the end of that." He chuckled, eyes distant. "I cried when they took him away. First time I saw my dad embarrassed." The dog shifted closer. "You're not Sailor. You're not a replacement. You're your own damn self." Elijah paused. "But I think you're stitching me back together." The days that followed were quieter, not empty, but introspective. Elijah began cleaning one room at a time, not to erase the past, but to make space for the present. He sorted old boxes, gave away coats, repaired a broken cabinet door. He lit the fireplace earlier, played old records. He even wrote just a few lines in a notebook, but words he hadn't tried forming in years. The dog followed him everywhere, a shadow, a heartbeat. When Elijah napped, the dog lay by the couch. When he read, the dog rested its chin on his slipper. When the wind howled, the dog growled back, soft, protective. One morning, Elijah stood in the mirror shaving. He looked older than he remembered, but his eyes, tired, yes, were no longer empty. The dog barked once from the other room. "All right," Elijah called out. "I'm coming." He smiled at his own reflection. He hadn't said those words, "I'm coming," in years. Not since Margaret. And just like that, the whispers of memory became a conversation again. Not just with the past, but with himself. It started with a glance, not a word, not a knock, just a glance, too long, too deliberate, from the woman with the white poodle. Elijah noticed it as he and the dog slowly crossed the sidewalk one quiet morning. The woman, bundled in a red scarf, pulled her dog close as she passed, and offered a thin-lipped smile. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. The kind that said, "I see you, I don't trust you." Elijah said nothing, just kept walking. But something about that glance lingered longer than it should have. 3 days later, the knock came. Firm, businesslike. Elijah opened the door to find a man in a navy windbreaker, clipboard in hand. The patch on his chest read, "Animal Control, County Services." "Mr. Elijah Monroe?" the man asked. "Yes?" "We received a report about a potentially unregistered and possibly injured dog on the premises." Elijah's heart skipped. His fingers tightened around the doorframe. "He's not dangerous," Elijah said. "He's healing. I found him weeks ago, hurt, been taking care of him." The officer glanced past him into the house. "Mind if I take a quick look?" Elijah hesitated, then stepped aside. The dog was lying on the rug, lifting his head with curiosity, tail thumping once against the floor. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just looked. The officer knelt nearby. "He looks alert. Coat's better than I expected." Elijah nodded. "Been feeding him. Vet visits scheduled. I just haven't had the funds to do everything yet." The officer made a note. "You'll need to license him. Vaccinations, rabies tag, that sort of thing." "I will." "You've got 7 days. After that, if we receive another complaint and he's not registered, we'll have to take action." Elijah felt his jaw tighten. "You mean take him away?" "It's procedure, sir." That night, Elijah sat by the fire, the dog's head on his foot. "You believe that?" he said. "After everything we've been through, we still have to prove ourselves." The dog blinked, then shifted closer. "I won't let them take you. I won't let them erase this." The next morning, Elijah dug through a drawer of unpaid bills and grocery coupons and pulled out a folded envelope labeled "Emergency." Inside was $212, his savings from leftover pension bits, coins and jars, and the money he never used because he never went anywhere. He took the dog to the vet. The tech was gentle, the exam was quick, rabies shot, checkup, paperwork signed, license tag issued, it was done. They walked home together, the dog's limp still present but lighter now. A tag dangling from the collar Elijah had finally buckled. "You're official now," he said. "Can't say that about most folks I know." But the world wasn't finished. Later that week, Elijah found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. Typed. "Some of us are uncomfortable with a large, untrained animal in the neighborhood. Please consider your neighbor's peace of mind." He stared at it, read it twice, then crumpled it and tossed it into the fireplace. The dog barked once, as if in agreement. The following afternoon, while walking the dog near the park, the woman with the white poodle stopped him. "I assume you got a visit," she said. Elijah nodded, calm. "All registered now, vet checked." "Still," she said, tightening her grip on the leash, "he's unpredictable. Some of us are concerned." "He hasn't harmed anyone," Elijah replied. "He barely even barks." "You live alone, right?" Elijah looked at her. "Not anymore." She frowned, but said nothing else, just walked away. But not everyone turned away. A young boy from down the block asked if he could pet the dog. Elijah hesitated. The dog looked up at him, then gently sniffed the boy's outstretched hand. "He's nice," the boy said, beaming. Another neighbor, an elderly man with a cane, gave Elijah a nod as they passed each other on the sidewalk. "Good to see someone still walking these streets with dignity," he said. Elijah thanked him, surprised. The world, it seemed, wasn't one voice. It was a chorus, some harsh, some kind, and for once Elijah had decided which ones to listen to. That night, he sat at the table with a cup of tea, the dog curled at his feet. He pulled out an old notebook and opened to a clean page. Wrote slowly, carefully. Dear Margaret, today I stood up for someone besides myself, and it felt like breathing for the first time in years. You were right, I needed someone, but I didn't know that someone would come on 4 legs, half-starved and silent. He's not just a dog, he's the piece of me I thought had died with you. Love always, Elijah. It began, like all routines do, without intention. One morning, Elijah rose from bed and found the dog already sitting by the front door, alert, tail gently sweeping the floor. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. Elijah pulled on his coat, slid on his worn boots, and without thinking, clipped the leash onto the dog's collar. And they stepped outside, not as 2 strangers surviving each other's company, but as companions moving through a world that had, until recently, ignored them both. The walk was slow. Elijah didn't mind. Neither did the dog. They didn't have a destination, just direction. Past the corner store, around the park perimeter, back up the block, where the mailboxes sat half-frozen in early spring frost. Some neighbors nodded. Some didn't, but for the first time in years, Elijah noticed the color of their doors, the way the sunlight hit the fence posts, the sound of wind moving through the leafless trees, and the dog, always beside him, step for step, looked at everything as if seeing it for the first time, like it all mattered. Elijah had forgotten how much life lives in the small things. Inside the house, new rhythms took shape. Breakfast at 8. The dog preferred scrambled eggs over turkey now. Elijah adjusted. They shared the back room in the afternoons. Elijah with his newspaper, the dog sprawled under the window. Some days Elijah read aloud, voice rusty but steady. "Hope is the thing with feathers," he said one morning, trailing off. The dog tilted his head. "It's a poem," Elijah explained. "She used to read it when I was too angry to speak." The dog yawned, curled tighter. That was answer enough. He began opening the windows more often, letting air in, letting light in. Margaret used to say, "A home isn't where you sit, it's where you see." He was starting to see again. He reorganized the kitchen cabinets, even bought a small set of fresh plates from the discount store, not out of need, but out of intention. He wasn't living to pass time anymore. He was living to make space. By the 3rd week, they had their route down. Turn right after the 2nd lamppost, wait at the corner with the blue fence. Stop outside the bakery, where the owner always waved and sometimes handed Elijah a biscuit for the both of you. One morning, a small girl ran up and asked, "What's his name?" Elijah froze. He hadn't thought of that. Not really. Names felt dangerous, permanent. But the dog turned, looked up at him, and Elijah said without hesitation, "His name's Charlie." Charlie wagged his tail once, like he approved. The girl giggled, "Hi, Charlie." And Charlie leaned forward, let her scratch behind his ears. Elijah smiled. "Guess that's settled." They developed rituals. Elijah would hum while making dinner, the same off-key tune Margaret used to tease him about. Charlie would bark once every evening at the same time, just before the news, as if reminding Elijah to turn it off. And every night, before bed, Elijah would kneel beside his armchair, one hand on Charlie's back, and whisper, "Thanks for staying." Not because Charlie had anywhere else to go, but because Elijah had almost forgotten how to ask someone to stay. One afternoon, Elijah opened the closet and found an old chessboard. He placed it on the kitchen table, set up the pieces. Charlie sat beside him, watching silently as Elijah moved a pawn. "You'll be black," Elijah said. "Hope you don't mind playing second." Charlie gave a small, short bark. Elijah grinned. "Didn't think so." He moved the white bishop. Charlie pawed at the black knight. "Well then," Elijah said, "I guess it's your move." And just like that, a quiet house became something more. Not loud, not crowded, but lived in. A new routine doesn't erase the past, but it reminds you that life isn't finished, that there are still mornings where the kettle sings, still afternoons where the wind smells like grass instead of dust. Still nights where the fireplace glows and someone, anyone, is close enough to hear your thoughts, even when you don't say them out loud. Charlie didn't fix Elijah, but he reminded him that Elijah wasn't broken beyond repair. And that was enough. Charlie no longer limped. It was subtle, the way it faded. One day he hesitated before stepping off the porch. The next, he didn't. Elijah noticed, of course. He noticed everything now. Every wag of the tail, every twitch of Charlie's ears, every shift in posture that said, "I'm still here." And in that healing, something else stirred. Not just in Charlie's bones, but in Elijah's spirit. Because Elijah too was limping less, not on the outside, but in the places grief had made him limp for years. The neighborhood changed with them. The same people who once crossed the street when they walked by now offered half smiles, then full ones. A barista at the corner cafe began setting out a small bowl of water every morning. A teen who worked the gas station counter asked, "What's his name again?" "Elijah," Charlie barked softly behind him, as if correcting. The teen laughed. "I meant the dog," Elijah smirked. "Charlie. Cool, he's chill." "Yeah," Elijah said. "He's something." They developed traditions outside the home now. On Thursdays, they walked to the library, not to check out books, but to sit on the bench out front while the wind carried stories in and out of the building. On Sundays, they took the long route around the park, stopping by the pond where ducks floated in crooked lines. Charlie never chased them, just watched, like he understood that peace was fragile. At home, Elijah started opening windows before noon. He lit candles not to mask anything, but to create something. He even moved the old armchair, the one Margaret used to sit in, closer to the fire. Not because he needed it, but because it felt like it was finally time to fill that space again. Charlie often curled beneath it now, guarding it, claiming it, or maybe honoring it. One afternoon, Elijah took out a small canvas and began to paint. He hadn't touched a brush in decades, not since college, not since a teacher once told him he had promise, and then life told him he had responsibilities. The brush trembled at first, but he didn't stop. Charlie lay beside him, eyes closed. The image on the canvas wasn't perfect. A porch, a tree, a dog, a man, but it felt real, and sometimes real is better than perfect. In the evenings, Elijah and Charlie began sitting outside after dinner. Charlie on the porch, Elijah in a creaky wooden chair. They didn't speak, of course not, but they listened. To wind, to birds, to the rare laughter echoing from a nearby house. One night, Elijah said quietly, "I used to think I had nothing left to say." Charlie looked up. "But I think maybe I was just waiting for someone who would listen without trying to fix it." Charlie nudged his foot. That was answer enough. The final piece of their healing came not in silence, but in song. One morning, Elijah stood by the sink, radio humming in the background, and began to sing along. Off-key, hesitant, but singing. Charlie's ears perked. He barked once, as if shocked. "You don't like Sinatra?" Elijah grinned. "Tough luck, boy. This is my kitchen." He kept singing, louder, bolder. And Charlie howled. A soft, half-hearted thing. It was ridiculous, it was terrible, it was perfect. Elijah laughed so hard he had to sit down. And Charlie, tail wagging, howled again, just because he could. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living, not like before, not like anyone else, but in a way that was uniquely theirs. And it was more than enough. There was a moment just before the sun rose when the world held its breath. That was when Elijah liked to sit by the window, cup of tea in hand, Charlie asleep beside his feet, and just be. Not think, not plan, just witness. Witness the soft light touch the tops of houses, the stillness of a street before footsteps broke it, the hush that came only when no one else was listening. And in those moments, Elijah no longer felt like a man waiting to die. He felt like someone living. Charlie stretched and nudged his foot. "Good morning," Elijah said. "Another day to confuse the neighbors, huh?" Charlie yawned, tail tapping once, twice. They had a rhythm now. Wake, walk, cook, sit, watch. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Elijah found himself smiling more easily now. He spoke to people again, not just out of politeness, but curiosity. He learned the baker's name was James. The girl at the library was Clara. The teenager at the corner store had a scholarship lined up for the fall. He even accepted a dinner invitation, the first in almost a decade. "You can bring your dog," the woman said. "I think he's more sociable than you." Elijah chuckled. He's had better practice lately. One afternoon, Elijah stood in the mirror, not out of habit, out of interest. He shaved, combed his hair, put on the blue sweater Margaret had always liked. He looked older than the man who once wore it, but he looked better too, more present, more there. Charlie barked from the hall. "Coming," Elijah called. "Don't start without me." They walked past the park, where a new bench had been installed near their usual route. It was simple, wooden, clean. But what made Elijah stop was the small plaque bolted into its side. "In honor of second chances, for those who wait and those who return." He didn't know who had put it there. Maybe no one he knew, maybe fate itself. He sat down. Charlie rested his head on Elijah's knee. They stayed like that for a long time. Later that night, Elijah opened the letter Margaret had left for him, the one he had found weeks ago but hadn't dared touch. The paper was thin, her handwriting delicate. "My Elijah," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and I'm sorry for that, but I need you to do one thing for me. Don't vanish. You have more to give than you know." He paused, eyes wet. "It doesn't have to be grand. Just let someone in, a neighbor, a stranger, a dog. Doesn't matter. But don't go quietly. Not when you've loved as much as I know you can. Love, Margaret." He folded the letter gently, set it on the table, then looked down at Charlie. "Guess I listened late," he whispered. "But I did listen." Charlie barked once, then curled up by his feet. That weekend, Elijah planted flowers in the front yard. Neighbors waved. One brought lemonade. A child passing on a scooter shouted, "Hi, Charlie." Charlie wagged his tail like royalty. Elijah waved back. It wasn't a parade, it wasn't a miracle, but it was community. And for a man who had once believed he'd die alone, it was everything. Later, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped low, Elijah leaned back and sighed. Charlie lay at his feet, eyes closing with each stroke of Elijah's hand. "You came out of nowhere," Elijah said. "But maybe you came from her." Charlie didn't respond, but he didn't need to. They were quiet for a long time, and in that quiet, there was no loneliness, no ache, no missing piece. There was peace. Because Elijah Monroe, once forgotten by the world, had finally found his place again, not as a husband, not as a ghost of the past, but as a man, a friend, a heart with room enough for one more soul. And this time, he wasn't alone anymore.
Sometimes all it takes is a heartbeat that's not your own, to remember you're still alive. Elijah didn't find a miracle. He found a creature just as broken as he was, and together, step by step, bark by breath, they healed, not by fixing what was lost, but by giving what they still had: time, care, presence. Charlie didn't just save Elijah from loneliness. He reminded him that life still happens, even when the world stops watching, that it's never too late to matter to someone. So if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered whether your story is over, let Elijah remind you. Sometimes the second chance doesn't come for you. Sometimes it comes through you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to believe in quiet miracles. And tell us in the comments who or what helped you find your way back.